Hello motion designers and welcome to a new live stream. I recently had a project where I had to create some dynamic titles and some texts were long, some texts were very short, but it all needed to stay consistent. So I made an example of it, what I made. And as you can see here, it comes in and it goes out. But the beautiful thing is, and if you take a proper look at the timing, if we start adjusting the input itself and we'll make it longer, let's make it longer, you actually see that the animation is now taking a lot longer. And it gives the user a lot of more time to, or the viewer, to watch that title properly for a longer time. And if we actually start making it very short, then the animation becomes a lot shorter as well. And on top of that, the animation will also adapt. So currently we have like a slow in movement of those two words. And if we create and adapt something, and if we make the text longer, it actually extends the stagger effect also. And in this way, you can really create dynamic titles that you can duplicate and really easy copy and paste in whatever project you are working. So let's start recreating this little animation. Let's create a new composition. Let's make the background, well, let's make the background like off-white. Let's try something new. And let's make it a square. Reduce the size. And now let's add the text itself. And for now, we'll stick with Lado. We'll just change the color to something black. And in this case, I'm actually gonna use the resolution of the composition for my text box size. We'll disable the auto and then add an expression of 200 and minus 200. And then link this text box size to the pivot and add some expressions here as well. If you followed my previous tutorials, you see me doing this very often. And then let's put it right in the center. And now that I think of it, I'm actually gonna stick with my own brand. It's easier for later on when I'm creating the thumbnails. So let's create 2121 and let's make the font itself my favorite yellow color with the tomorrow font. And whenever we start typing, Cavalry is the best software out there and I love it. It will be always centered in the middle, ensuring the text box size. Let's enable shrink to fit box. Don't allow word breaks. And let's keep avoid orphans for as it is. And the next thing I want to do, and if we take a look at the example, is to actually create these dynamic elements that we can highlight specific words. So let's change the tomorrow to here to bold. And I also want to enforce it always to have it upper caps. And let's call this upper caps. And the next thing what we'll do is actually create a style behavior and then apply a typeface. And the typeface itself, not specific indexes, we just want to use a regex. And let's fill in for now Cavalry. And if you use like a line, I have no idea how it's called. It is basically an or statement, and let's call it software. And you see the font changing, but we want to stick with the tomorrow font and actually make it, let's say, black italic to bold extra bold italic. Perfect. This is what we want. Let's put it inside our text element for organization. Let's call this input text. And then apply typeface. And what we also will do is create a material behavior and apply text material. Let's put it inside our text element. Open the text material, and also here we're gonna use regex, and we'll connect the regex from this to the regex here, so it always is equal. And then we'll change this to the color white. And now whenever we want to change something or adjust it, we can just type it in. To make it a bit more organized, I'm going to create a component. And within the component, I'm going to drag in the regex and also the text itself. And let's organize it. Let's remove it. And now we always have somewhere to fall back. Let's create a dynamic title. And if we now change this here to create and dynamic, we have some highlights within our text. But currently it's not automating. And what I want to do is to put this inside on, well, before we actually put it inside a submesh, we'll actually start getting some data from this input text. So we'll actually create a string, I forgot how it's called, string length. And let's put it inside here, and let's count the words. And if we connect our string, and the funny thing is, because we're using the component, we don't have to open the input text. We can just directly link it from here to here. And it's basically the exact same way of connecting stuff. And instead of characters, I actually want to count words. We'll duplicate this and let's count the characters. Could have done it the opposite way. Let's add this one as well. So we have actually two sets of data that we can use. The amount of characters, which is 28, and the amount of words, which is 5. Let's put the input text inside the component. So if we ever want to move the component or copy paste it somewhere else, we can just copy this and continue working on it. What we'll do now is actually create a submesh. So we can actually split the words in separate mesh components. So we can actually start animating them one by one. So let's add this submesh. Go to the input text here. And instead of text characters, we actually select text words. You currently don't see anything happening, so we'll have to animate some stuff. So let's animate the opacity and let's animate it in. But currently there is no offset. And what we're going to do for that is the time offset, and we're going to use, as usual, the stagger effect. So let's add the stagger effect. And when we add the stagger effect, we can actually now see there is an animation happening, but it's moving the opposite direction. Let's change it and let's increase the maximum so we can actually see it. But it's already starting ahead of itself, so let's put it on -25. And if we now play it, it actually starts playing it properly in the beginning. But currently, if we just leave it at a maximum of -25, No matter how much text you write, and let's actually do that, and just add some random words. No matter how long the text is, it will always animate within that 25 frames. But what I want is to actually give it more time the longer the text is. And we're gonna use the actual count the words. So let's bring this back to dynamic. And we'll plug in count the words inside the stagger effect. And then add an expression and say times -5. So now for every character or every word, it takes 5 extra frames to animate in. So if we actually start increasing the string itself, increase the string by a lot more, you actually see that the stagger effect is increasing in size. And if we play it, it will actually take a lot more time to animate the full title sequence or the full title itself. And this is one of the effects that I want. So let's remove this element. But what I also want to do is actually start animating actually every single individual letter itself. How do we do that? So let's open the submesh and let's add another deformer, another submesh on top of it. And let's call this the words, and let's call this the characters, or just the letters. And if we open letters and we would, let's say, add a random position. Well, let's first add a value, because I actually want to animate it, and a value to the Y. And then in the Y, we'll actually create a random behavior. And we'll increase the random behavior. I'm gonna make it a nice and easy opposite direction as well. It's not changing at all. But if we go to all letters, let's go to characters. But as you see, it's not changing. And if we go to lines, well, the line is working, but it's not exactly what we want. And in this case, we just need to choose all, because Cavalry is currently seeing the submesh as not as like individual letters or lines or words. It's seeing every single individual mesh as a mesh, and that's why I'm choosing all. Let's also do recalculate pivot, so it's always nice in the center. And all we need to do is to actually animate it. So let's go to animate, no, to the value, and change this from, well, actually we put it first at 0. And then we'll increase this by 100%. And if we play it now, because the words already had a time offset, these elements are already having a time offset. So we now have a nice animation that is playing for each word, but at the same time also for each individual character. So let's do some magic easing. Let's do some very slow out. Let's see if this looks better. Well, kind of, but it could be better, but for the sake of the tutorial, we're not gonna tweak it too much. And let's call this the Y position. And let's put it inside letters. And the last thing that I want to do for words is to actually add a blur, and let's just use a fast blur. There it is. And let's connect the Y to the X. Let's put it at 0, set a keyframe, then move to the front and let's make it 20. And if we animate it in, then every single blur, because it's set on each individual mesh in the words, the blur also has an offset in animation depending on each word. So we now have our animation. It's working nice. Let's also add an outro animation, and let's keep it very simple for now. Let's do the opacity, the amount, and quickly animate it out. And this to 100%. So it animates in, and then it actually animates out. And if we actually would increase the text or increase our string, let's go to the component and make this a lot longer, the animation will slowly adjust it to the content itself as well. But as you can see, just imagine if you have a very long text, you actually want to have the text stay longer on screen as well. So we actually need to be able to adjust the timing of this element as well. And the beautiful thing within Cavalry is we have a time marker that we can connect to each individual keyframe. So let's connect it. And if we would move this keyframe or this marker, the keyframes would follow along with it. But how do we make sure that this marker will actually move further back the more characters there are? And like we did before, we already counting the characters. We just need to find a way how to connect to it. So let's close the component. Well, let's close everything. And let's count the characters, and let's open that. And we currently have like 55 characters, and we're approximately on, well, let's, for the sake of the tutorial, let's put it on 200, approximately 200. And if we play it, the animation comes in, it gives us time to take a look at it, and then it animates out. So it's approximately 4 times bigger. So we'll just use a math node. Let's put the math inside here and determine end keyframes. And we'll just plug in the count the characters in the first and multiply it by, let's say, 3.75, approximately 200. And what we can do is double click on the marker itself. Make sure you press on this little icon or just click and drag so it stays on the screen. And then we can actually input the result of the keyframes into the absolute time. And now you actually see it changing. So if we now change the input text, and we make it shorter, you will see that the keyframes will be pushed towards the front of the timeline. But there's an issue. At a given moment, when the text is in view and the text is short, it might become too short, because if we just have like a title with 2 words with very few characters, then the whole animation breaks. So we need to figure out a way how to cap it. So let's create some dynamic titles. And we actually want to tell Cavalry, like, hey, we're at 120 and the animation takes approximately 20 frames, but the beginning frames are, let's say, at 60 frames. So we don't want to go below 80. In that case, we're gonna create another math node. let's put it below, and let's call this max or clamp. And let's select that, and then instead of multiply we choose max, and then it always chooses the maximum value. So in this case we want to use the maximum value of 80, or it will use the biggest number of determined keyframes. So let's put this in the second, and instead of connecting the determined end keyframes, we'll connect the result. We connect the result of this in the absolute time, replace connection, close it, and the moment we make our titles a lot shorter, at a given moment it will not go below 80. And a noticed, let's create some dynamic titles. As you can see, there's still some overlap, and in this case I'll just increase the max or the minimum, and if we would change the string length, then it would actually cap at 100 frames. So we currently have now a full animation that's depending on the input of those dynamic titles or of the dynamic elements. So if we take a look at it, it's currently fully animating, but we still have an issue that the tail of this specific animation is just completely empty. And how nice would it be if we could actually cap the length of the duration of the composition depending on how long this animation will take. So if we take a look at the animation at 120, there's still some delay of approximately 20 frames. And if we take a look at our staggered effect, that's correct because it's at 25 frames. And if we would actually increase our text, it would constantly increase. So we need to figure out a way how we can input this number into the total duration of the animation and figure out a dynamic way. So we have to use some math nodes again. But before we do that, let's organize it. Let's put the stagger effect inside the component. Inside. There we go. And let's create a new math node. And we'll plug in the maximum of the stagger effect into the math node. But instead of having it minus 25, so it would be counting down, I want to have it in a positive value. So let's do times minus 1. So it becomes 25. And what we also want to do is to have the maximum and the clamp actually figure out the maximum amount of time of that animation will take and plug it into this as well. And let's add it to the add, so we have the total time. So if we go to our animation, currently the result is saying 145 frames. And if we would move towards 145, that would be indeed the end of the animation. If we open our component and again, and let's make the title longer again. Let's make it longer. Now it's longer, and now the stagger effect increases, and so it is relatively increasing at the same time. So we need to check if the 240 is actually making sense in this animation. So let's scroll to 240, and yes, there it is. At 240, the animation is completely gone. So let's open the composition, and we're gonna manipulate the composition timing, and we'll do that just by adding the result to the frame range and the playback range at the end number. And for the sake of organization, let's open everything and select everything and just drag the end. Come on. Why is my mouse buggy? Oh, it's not working. I see. So let's increase the text a bit longer and let's make it longer. And you already see the composition changing by a lot more. And if we figure out, hey, it's not working, let's see. Okay, now it's working. Yeah, okay, fair enough. Let's add some more text to it so I can actually extend the whole animation. And currently we have a bunch of random text, but as you can see, if we scroll in the very end, the composition duration is exactly until the moment that the last animation or the last word has animated out. So let's remove it. And now it's back at 150. And the composition adjusts by itself. So this is really nice. So the moment you start exporting a lot of titles, and for example, you have this connected to a spreadsheet, you could actually just import the spreadsheet, export everything, and all the compositions would be cut off at the moment the animation is done. So let's take a look if we're still missing something. No, it seems that we already have everything. Let me check. Let me check the example itself. We could add the components, but that's really easy. Let's open a component element. Let's input elements and let's start connecting this to the component. Connect to new attribute. Let's do this also for the remaining line spacing component attributes. And if we now open our component, well, let's remove everything, clean interface, and now we have something that we can work with. So you can really easily now actually add this as a pre-comp override. And once you start working in other compositions and you want to import this as a stock element that you can reuse, you can easily do that. And in some cases, you might encounter a scenario where you need a lot more fine-tuned elements. Then you can just copy the component into the composition and you have a lot more flexibility. Let's put the math node inside here and let's call this determine composition length. And there it is. Cool, we made our component, and every single time when we are changing stuff, and let's say Cavalry is the most amazing software there is and I love it. And you see the composition changing in length. The animation is working as well. And if I want to highlight some elements, I'll just put it in this regex. And let's also add software and love. And there we have it, a fully dynamic title that is adjusting on the time, on the input, and yeah, connected to your rendering, and you really have a nice way of outputting a lot of titles in a short time. Well, this was the tutorial for today. I'm going back to work and see you next time. Bye bye, take care.